College football. I believe at this point you already know what it is. We're towards the end of this iceberg, so if nothing else, you should at least know that. I've covered a significant amount of entries during this iceberg, so if you haven't already, I would highly recommend watching the earlier parts of this iceberg, especially since many of these entries point back to earlier parts. Nonetheless, thank you all again for the support you've given to this series. It's been quite the joy to do. But this does take a arduous amount of typing scripts and editing, as well as trying to avoid the risk of carpal tunnel. Anyway, you're not here to listen to me complain about my selfish cries for help, you're here for college football. So without further ado, let's waste no more time and begin with part 6 of the college football iceberg. I had to do some very heavy-duty searching to find information on these entries. We're reaching a point now to where the information on this stuff is things that college football fans would rather just forget about due to the nature of some of these. I've touched on some entries like these, but many of these entries carry some graphic detail for the sake of information that I have to inform you of. Just be aware of that as we dive into the deepest parts of this iceberg. Also, many of these topics have hours worth of information on it that you can find through other videos about these certain topics that I didn't cover. Nonetheless, I did cover at least the ground level of all these entries, so with all that being said, let's begin. Jim Harbaugh's slumber party. Starting off with a real interesting one, we've discussed before who Jim Harbaugh is, as he's a former Michigan football head coach who's most recently won a national championship in 2023. Way back during Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan on January 12, 2016, it came out that Jim Harbaugh would be planning a sleepover at a recruit's house. This incident was the first time that anything like this has been ever heard of in the modern world of college football. The recruit in question, kicker Quinn Nordin, was the top kicker recruit in the country from Rockford, Michigan. Nordin told Scout.com that, quote, "He said we can watch a movie, see how well we gel, and he said that we would sleep over after that. If my parents didn't want me to miss school, he would go to every class with me and go to lunch with me." I was laughing so hard. I said, "Coach, I have Penn State stuff all over my walls," and he said, "Tell you what, I can help you take it down." This was a strange way of recruiting in the eyes of college football fans and staff alike. He did this multiple times with several different recruits from the 2017 class, including Arizona 4-star defensive lineman Connor Murphy, who on the Sports 360 Arizona radio show explained in detail what goes on at these sleepovers. Quote, "He got to my house around 1 a.m., we ate some banana bread and drank some ice cold milk. That's his favorite, 2% milk, so we made sure to give him a whole gallon of that. We chatted it up probably for another hour and then we hit the hay." This was seen as one of the most bizarre ways to recruit. Murphy would commit to the USC Trojans, however, Nordin would spend his career in college at Michigan, seemingly influenced by the sleepover. Schiano Sunday. Greg Schiano is a former Bucknell linebacker and a current college football coach. Schiano spent many years as the head coach of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, where he carried Rutgers to an 11-2 season and a win in the Texas Bowl against Kansas State, the first bowl win in school history. Through 2016, Schiano served as the assistant head coach and defensive coordinator of the Ohio State Buckeyes. One thing to take into account is that Schiano was an assistant and defensive back coach for Penn State from 1990 through 1995, notably during the time frame of the Jerry Sandusky child scandal. In 2016, a Philadelphia court released documents in relation to the scandal, revealing testimony from Mike McQueary stating that Schiano was aware of the abuse, saw it happen in real time, and chose to avoid telling law enforcement. These allegations will come to the forefront shortly. Meanwhile, over in Knoxville, Tennessee, towards the closing games of the 2017 season after a 50-17 loss to Missouri, head coach Butch Jones was fired. Tennessee Athletic Director John Currie was quick on the hunt to find a replacement. First, he tried Dan Mullen of Mississippi State, which didn't work due to his interest in Florida, which came to the forefront when Central Florida coach Scott Frost denied interest in taking the Gators' job. With Mullen out of the picture for the Vols, Currie got on a plane at the Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge Airport bound for Ohio, intending to hire, you guessed it, Greg Schiano. Once the news broke on Sunday afternoon, one word can describe how Tennessee fans reacted to the news: fury. A Knoxville coffee shop tweeted it would ban him from entry, Tennessee lawmakers joined the protests with tweets and comments, and some fans took to the streets of downtown Knoxville in active protest. Though Curry and Schiano were close to finalizing the deal, they ultimately confirmed around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that the deal was off. Tennessee Chancellor Beverly Davenport issued a statement saying, "I deeply regret the events of yesterday for everyone involved." Davenport added that the university remains steadfast in its commitment to excellence, and I look forward to John Curry continuing the search for a new coach. This event was a spectacle for outsiders looking in, believing that Tennessee right now was a complete and utter joke. This led to a fumbled attempt at a coaching search and the eventual firing of athletic director John Curry. Schiano's legacy would be continued at Rutgers, where he would once again become the head coach of the team. As for Tennessee, they would eventually bring in former championship-winning coach of the Vols, Philip Fulmer, as their new athletic director. The new head coach would be Alabama's former defensive coordinator, Jeremy Pruitt. Why are these details so important? You're bound to find out soon. Death of the Pac-12. This entry is basically a summarization of many of the things we've touched on in past entries, stuffed into one big entry about the Pac-12. This all began when back in the summer of 2022, it was announced that USC and UCLA would be leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten as early as 2024. Following this news, negotiations with Apple TV for a new TV deal would be performed, but this eventually fell through, and directly after the event, Oregon and Washington would also leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. The Pac-12 throughout this time was unable to secure a deal with ESPN in the Big 12's expansion-friendly arrangement. As for the Big 12 after this, they took 4 teams from the Pac-12's remaining roster, including Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. The ACC also sapped away California and Stanford from the conference. As of now, Oregon State and Washington State are the only 2 schools that remain in the Pac-12 for the 2024 through 25 academic year. At the end of June, the Pac-12 network shut down, illustrating the end of the Pac-12 conference. The studio in San Ramon, California will remain open to serve the 2 remaining schools, but for how long will this last? 2020 was a simulation. There wasn't much information I could find about this particularly, but some fans out there believe that the 2020 college football season was an advanced simulation with a fixed game result for the important games of the season. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, this left a lot of teams without their star players or without a team to play entirely. Some say that this was intentional, pointing back to the argument between who forfeit the Michigan-Ohio State game of the same year. Yeah, that's pretty much it. There really wasn't much of a solid ground that this claim stands on, and the only reason it's on here is because it foreshadows another entry coming later on. Christian NCAA. If there are 2 things that are blended into controversy the most, it's politics and religion. Both just so happen to blend with college football. There are many teams in college football who have prayed before and after games, and many players and coaches give all the glory to God for wins. Some of these pro-Christian events have put colleges into some major controversy. In February of 2023, the Freedom from Religion Foundation alleged in a letter to the Colorado Chancellor Phil DeStefano that Colorado head coach Deion Sanders had been engaging in, quote, inappropriate and unconstitutional actions by, quote, engaging in religious exercises with players and staff members. Sanders is facing these controversies because of his prayers with the team. The same foundation went after Auburn coach Hugh Freeze for attending and helping with a revival and baptism event called the Night of Worship. The organization argued that Freeze violated the U.S. Constitution. Teams such as the Clemson Tigers are surrounded with the ideals of Christianity under head coach Dabo Swinney. When a reporter asked Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney to discuss his faith in July of 2018, Swinney chuckled and said that this was the easiest question of the day, following with a 2-minute sermon. He said that when he meets his maker one day, he, quote, won't pat me on the back and tell me how many wins I had. Arguably, the colleges with the most significant ties to religion are Notre Dame, a heavy Catholic university, and Brigham Young University, or BYU. BYU was founded to instill in students the value of the Church of Latter-day Saints, or Mormon, and to promote leading lives rooted in learning and service. Despite the high level of controversy, the NCAA promotes the idea of individual universities expressing their religions. In a document titled Common Ground Action Strategies 1471, it goes into clean detail about the NCAA's policy on religion. Quote, people of all religious faiths, as well as those who don't subscribe to any religious faith, should be welcomed and respected as valued members of the athletic department community. This neutrality enables individual student athletes, coaches, and staff to express their respective religious beliefs and, at the same time, protects the rights of student athletes, coaches, and staff who do not share those religious beliefs. To this day, many college football teams take part in prayer before or after the games to the chagrin of anti-religion groups. Ron Weaver. Ron Weaver was a college football player for the University of Texas. Weaver, who played under the alias Joel Ron McKelvey, played under his own name when he enrolled at Monterey Peninsula College in the fall of 1984. After his graduation in 1989, he attempted tryouts with the British Columbia Lions of the Canadian Football League, but didn't have the power or speed to be of asset to the team. As a cornerback, he played 2 seasons at Los Angeles Pierce College under an assumed name and a different date of birth, using the name and social security number of a friend who never played sports. He then transferred to Texas, and by this point, he was now 30 years old when his claimed age was 23. He eventually gained a full scholarship. The day before the 1995 Sugar Bowl, where the Longhorns were scheduled to play Virginia Tech, Weaver's scheme would eventually become unsealed. The Salinas Californian acted on an anonymous tip revealing his real name and age. Weaver initiated a promise to produce a birth certificate, which came to nothing, and then he disappeared shortly before the game. Post the 28-10 loss to Virginia Tech, Texas players expressed their horror that one of the teammates was actually an imposter. Coach John Makovic and other officials claimed to know nothing of Weaver's fraud until he was caught. Because Weaver had a non-existent role in his games at Texas, the NCAA cleared Texas of wrongdoing, accepting school officials' contention that they did not know and could not have known of Weaver's fraud. Weaver ultimately pleaded guilty in a California federal court to misusing a social security number. He did not serve any jail time. This has been the only case of this kind of fraud occurring. Clemson spies. Before Connor Stallions made it cool to do it, there were many other allegations thrown out that several other teams in college football were stealing signs. The Clemson Tigers were supposedly a victim and a suspect of this. In December of 2017, number 1 Clemson was preparing for the Sugar Bowl college football playoff semifinal against Alabama. Instead of training in the Sugar Bowl Superdome, they instead practiced outdoors at Tulane's home field. Clemson linebacker Dorian O'Daniel was asked about this decision, where he said, quote, "Maybe because it's a dome and there might be some spies sitting around in the bleachers." This actually came from an allegation thrown out in 2007 by Oklahoma coach Bob Stoops when referring to the 2003 national title game against LSU. Speaking with ESPN, Stoops said the Sooners, quote, "may have made a mistake by practicing in the dome." Head coach of Clemson, Dabo Swinney, was asked about this as well, where he said that the decision was because he wanted a smaller environment. Clemson ended up losing the game 24-6. Later on, during the 2020 season, Miami offensive coordinator Rhett Lashley was asked on a Zoom call about Clemson's reputation for stealing an opponent's offensive signals that are used to relay play calls from the sidelines, where he said, quote, "Clemson is known well for doing it." These details came to the forefront from an article from Sports Illustrated writer Pat Forday, claiming that these details are true, calling the Tigers masters of the art of the steal. He referenced Clemson's massive staff and resources in their football program as reasons why they could get away with it. But my question is, if only teams with elite staff and resources could do it, why didn't other teams do the same thing? There are several other teams with equal resources, but what do you think? Do you believe Pat Forday here? Mex the dog. Dogs are a very common mascot in college football, as a lot of teams in all kinds of sports use them as their mascot. Very rarely, though, do these mascots ever change, but such was the case of the Oklahoma Sooners and their dog mascot, Mex. Mex the dog was a brindle bulldog who served as the mascot for Oklahoma's football team from 1915 until his death in 1928. Mex was among a litter of abandoned puppies in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution found by Mott Keyes, an Army Field Hospital medic and a future Oklahoma student. Keyes adopted Mex and brought him to the university, where he learned tricks and became very popular at the university. As the team's mascot, Mex was known for his loud staccato bark at football games and his victory woof at baseball games. He wore a red sweater with a big red O on the side and was a guardian to help stray dogs off the field during games. When Mex eventually passed, he was buried under the 4 elm trees at the north end of the field. His funeral procession included medical students, the band, a eulogy by the fraternity president, and Keys, who had the last word. He was buried in a small casket under Section 18 of Oklahoma Memorial Stadium. Of course, now we know Oklahoma's mascot as Boomer and Sooner, two brown-eyed horses, but Mex will and has always remained a major part of Oklahoma culture. McDonald's at the White House. Following Clemson's national championship win over Alabama in January of 2019, as a tradition, they were welcomed to the White House by the President of the United States. The president at the time, Donald Trump, served the team burgers, pizza, and fries from some of America's most storied fast food chains. The resulting buffet included hamburgers, fries, salads, and fish sandwiches from McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's alongside Domino's Pizza. This was seen as a strange supper, especially since the dining room was particularly for traditional formal meals. At the time of this event, the government was undergoing a partial shutdown, which was also the longest in U.S. history, which was supposedly briefed as the reason behind the food presented. Despite this, the decision was met with backlash by some media outlets. However, some of the players and coaches showed their support for the meal they got. Quarterback Trevor Lawrence said that the trip was awesome. 75 other players attended the feast, according to a university spokesperson. However, the rest of the 119 players on the roster denied the invitation due to disagreements with President Trump's policies. None of the players that went complained about the meal or the environment that they were in. All that needs to be known is that this event was a very interesting moment in college football history. Lauren Luther Wade. Before the 2005 college football season, Lauren Luther Wade was expected to be the starting running back for Arizona State University. However, this wouldn't be the case for long. Back in March of 2005, late at night outside of a Scottsdale nightclub, Wade came to the nightclub to pick up his girlfriend. Upon arrival, he saw his girlfriend talking with a former player, 25-year-old Brandon Fauler. He confronted Fauler, and after an altercation ensued, Wade fatally shot Fauler while he was sitting in his car. The car went around a building and eventually collided with another vehicle and tree before stopping. Detective Sam Bailey said, quote, "From everything I've heard, they didn't know each other. He, as in Fauler, may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time talking to the wrong person." Scottsdale police arrested Wade on suspicion of first-degree murder. Wade was convicted of second-degree murder on June 7, 2007, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He is scheduled to be released from prison in March of 2025. Jeremy Pruitt was framed. Remember how I foreshadowed this name after the Schiano Sunday entry? Well, here you go. Jeremy Pruitt was the head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers from 2018 through 2020. He had his fair shares of ups and downs at Tennessee, specifically downwards during the 2020 season. Where he started 2-0, he then proceeded to go 1-7 in the last 8 games, finishing out 3-7. After the end of the 2020 season, detailed allegations came out about Jeremy Pruitt allegedly breaking NCAA rules. As it turned out, Pruitt, his wife, and several members of his football staff provided around $60,000 of impermissible benefits and recruiting inducements to more than 24 recruits and their families during his 3 years as head coach. In December, the NCAA began an official investigation into the allegations after UT informed both it and the Southeastern Conference about the findings following reports of violations from Tennessee Chancellor Donde Plowman. Tennessee would suspend Pruitt without pay until his contract was officially terminated, which took place on Tuesday, January 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Along with this, several other coaches were fired, and Philip Fulmer, the athletic director, would resign from his position. For the penalties, Tennessee received 5 years of probation, a reduction of 36 football scholarships over the term of probation, 40 reduced weeks of visits, and among the rest of the penalties, Pruitt was handed a 6-year show cause order for his role in providing impermissible benefits, effective until July 13, 2029. If Pruitt is hired by another NCAA member school during this time, he will be suspended for the entire first season of his return. The conspiracy here is that Pruitt never actually did anything wrong, and that the school threw him under the bus due to his poor performance on the field. The main citation for this conspiracy is that the allegations were self-reported by Plowman in Tennessee before anything else was discovered. However, despite this being true, the conspiracy itself is likely false. Pruitt himself admitted to these allegations, saying that he broke NCAA guidelines due to the racial disputes occurring in 2020 as the main reason why. As of currently, Pruitt resides as a PE teacher in Plainsville, Alabama. John Karkoska. The 1990 Baylor Bears were exposed to heartbreak before their game against Texas Tech on September 29, 1990. On September 13th, redshirt freshman offensive lineman John Karkoska collapsed during a workout and unfortunately never regained consciousness again. He passed just 10 minutes away from the game against Sam Houston State the week afterwards on September 22nd. When investigators looked into the cause of the death, they uncovered that it came from kidney and liver failure, or what they called a total system failure, which is when multiple organs fail at once. Baylor team physician Dr. R.W. Covington said that the condition possibly came from an infection or virus and not a heat stroke. Many media outlets disagreed. The funeral, 4 days before the game against Texas Tech, was met with buses full of the Baylor team. In reference to the Tech game afterwards, offensive guard Monty Jones said, quote, "We were all fresh because we didn't practice that whole week. We just went down there and took it out on them." This seemed to be true as Texas Tech was defeated by Baylor 21-15. Following this game, Deringer Cade, a 20-year-old Northeast Missouri State player, also unfortunately passed after collapsing on the sidelines during Saturday's game against Southwest Baptist in Bolivar, Missouri. Northeast Missouri State officials said this came from an abnormally high level of glucose in his system, which is a side effect of an undiagnosed case of diabetes. Deaths like this one have been the forefront of controversy regarding pre-game conditioning before football games. Nonetheless, rest in peace to these two young men. Manti Te'o's girlfriend. Manti Te'o was a linebacker for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish from 2009 through 2012. In 2012, he won the Maxwell, Walter Camp, and Chuck Bednarik Awards, among others. In his senior year, he learned of the unfortunate passing of his grandmother and his girlfriend on the same day. The girlfriend in question, Lene Kakua, was a student of Stanford University who had been injured in a car and while under treatment learned she had leukemia. Or so we thought. As it turns out, after receiving an anonymous email tip in January of 2013, reporters Timothy Burke and Jack Dickey of the sports blog Deadspin conducted an investigation into Kakua's identity. On January 16th, they published an article alleging Kakua did not exist and pointed to a man named Ranaya Naya Tuiasosopo. Following this investigation, Notre Dame issued their own statement which basically confirmed the myth to be true. Te'o's relationship with Kakua was, quote, exclusively an online relationship, so it would be difficult to tell that it wasn't a catfish or a fake account pretending to be somebody else. This hoax seemed to be much more believable because Te'o said that the girl was someone he met in person, according to family accounts. However, Te'o admitted in an interview with sports journalist Jeremy Schaap that this was a lie as well. In a January 24, 2013 interview on Katie with Katie Couric, Te'o played 3 voicemails left by Kakua and said the voice, quote, sounds like a girl. In an appearance on Dr. Phil on January 31st and February 1st, Tuiasosopo confessed to the hoax and admitted to falling in love with Te'o and using the Kakua identity. Tuiasosopo also recreated the female voice behind a privacy screen. Te'o's experience was the subject of a Netflix documentary called Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, which was released on August of 2022. Let this be a lesson for anyone who is using dating apps in today's modern world. Declan Sullivan. On a windy day, October 27, 2010, Notre Dame student filmmaker Declan Sullivan was on a hydraulic lift 40 feet into the air. Sullivan expressed displeasure about filming outside when the wind was up to 50 miles per hour and even tweeted about it, calling it, quote, terrifying weather. He wrote, quote, gust of winds up to 60 miles per hour today will be fun at work. I guess I've lived long enough. Considering what would occur half an hour later, these comments were spine-chilling. After a sudden wind gust up to 53 miles per hour hit the lift, the pressure caused it to collapse. This sent the lift, and by extension Sullivan, downwards to the ground, instantly taking his life. Investigators, including University Vice President John Affleck Graves, concluded that this accident was the cause of lack of knowledge from the staff, the lift used, which was more susceptible to tipping over, and the height that Sullivan was at when it occurred. These details were released as the Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Administration fined Notre Dame $77,500 for 6 safety violations tied to Sullivan's death, including knowingly putting its employees in an unsafe situation. Seeing the death as a direct result of incompetence by officials, online outlets expressed their outrage. However, the Sullivan family, contrary to those on the internet, acknowledged that Notre Dame had made mistakes, that his death could and should have been prevented, yet the Sullivans cheered for Notre Dame and for its football team even louder than before. The family created a memorial fund and partnered with a local charity. During one of Sullivan's screenplays named, quote, Clouds, as the main character Freefell, a narrating priest says, "We may never know what exactly was going through his mind during those last few moments. But let us pray that during those moments, this young man finally found peace." Cal Jones. Cal Jones was an offensive guard for the Iowa Hawkeyes from 1953 through 1955. He was a 2-time consensus All-American, and he was an All-Big Ten member each year he played. After he graduated from Iowa, he was selected in the 9th round of the 1956 NFL Draft by the Detroit Lions, but refused to sign with the team as the NFL paid black players less than whites. Instead, he went to Canada and signed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the Western and Provincial Football Union. Following the All-Stars game, Jones was scheduled to fly to the 1957 Rose Bowl to watch Iowa play Oregon State. On December 9th, 1956, Jones overslept his scheduled morning flight from Vancouver, so he scheduled an afternoon flight to stop at Calgary and then travel to Winnipeg. Cal Jones' flight on TransCanada Airlines Flight 810 from Vancouver to Calgary crashed at Slezy Mountain, killing all 62 people aboard. The Iowa Hawkeye team heard of Jones' death as they prepared for the Rose Bowl, and the team dedicated Iowa's first Rose Bowl appearance to Cal's memory and won the game 35-19. The team sent the game ball to Talitha Jones, Cal's mother in Steubenville. Cremated remains at Jordan-Hare. After the kick 6, 5th time I mentioned that by the way, Auburn fans took to the field in bulk, covering up the stadium in joyful Auburn fans. However, after cleanup began, among the pom-poms, the cleaning and repairing crew of Jordan-Hare discovered ashes on the field near the 40-yard line. These ashes also had tiny bones within the ashes. No one was certain of whether these remains were human. Scott McElroy, associate professor for turfgrass and weed science at Auburn, told AL.com that, quote, "It could have been grandma or it could have been grandma's dog." He also said that this actually occurs much more often than you think, as many people want themselves or their animals to be buried under Auburn Stadium. For any Auburn fans listening, think twice before rushing the field, as you could have remains of a person on your shoe afterwards. How come The Blind Side didn't focus on that? College Football All-Stars versus the NFL. The Chicago Charities College All-Star Game was a preseason American football game played from 1934 to 1976 between the National Football League champions and a team of star college seniors from the previous year. It was also known as the College All-Star Football Classic. The game was the idea of Arch Ward, the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune and the driving force behind baseball's All-Star Game. Being a game which matched the pros of the best NFL team against upcoming rookies, you can only imagine how the outcome would turn out. The NFL owned the series, 30-9-2. Despite how lopsided most of these games were, it was a heavy spectacle for observers. When the matchup first started, it was often a competitive matchup, but by the late 1960s and 1970s, the gap between the two teams began to widen exponentially. The enthusiasm for the game started to erode as NFL coaches became increasingly reluctant to let their new draftees play in the exhibition game due to their players being forced to miss part of training camp and their draftees being at considerable risk for injury. As early as 1949, these concerns had spiked after Dick Riffenberg suffered a serious knee injury practicing for the game, effectively ending his professional career before it even began, and prompting Riffenberg to move into broadcasting. In 1974, due to a players' strike, the game would be canceled that year. The final college all-star game took place in 1976 during a torrential downpour at Soldier Field on July 23rd. Despite featuring star players such as Chuck Muncie, Mike Pruitt, Leroy Selmon, and Jackie Slater, the All-Stars were hopelessly outmatched by the Pittsburgh Steelers, winners of consecutive Super Bowls. Due to the weather, officials ordered both teams to the locker rooms with 1:22 left in the third quarter, which led to fans invading the field. Officials and security were completely overwhelmed by the crowd, who tore down the goalposts and left the field in an unplayable state. Drunk fans brawled on the field until finally the officials were able to control the crowd. The only aspect from this strange game that lives on in today's world is the NFL kickoff game, which has the winner of the Super Bowl of the previous year kicking off the start of the college football season. Ty Jordan and Aaron Lowe. Utah's freshman running back Ty Jordan was one of the bright spots for Utah in the 2020 season. In 5 games, he had 83 carries, 597 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, and 126 passing yards off of 11 catches. Going into the 2021 season, expectations for Jordan were sky high. However, tragically, on Christmas night of 2020, Jordan was hit with an accidental self-inflicted gunshot wound, taking his life at 19. Utah cornerback Aaron Lowe, who was best friends with Jordan, was distraught at the news of his passing and determined to live his life and play the game in his friend's memory. He switched his jersey number from 2 to 22 in an attempt to keep Jordan close in the 2021 season. Starting the 2021 season at 1-2, it was the expectation that Utah would not reach the Pac-12 championship or anywhere near, but Lowe disagreed, believing that they were destined to win the Pac-12 that season. Unfortunately, Lowe himself would not be able to see this day, as he was gunned down on September 26 at a house party after getting into an altercation with an uninvited crasher. Utah's football team was left in disarray following this news, as they were on a bye week following the tragedy. Lowe's mother, Donna, addressed the team and encouraged them to keep fighting because that is what her son would have wanted. Utah's team responded by beating USC at their home stadium for the first time in 105 years. They went on to win the Pac-12 championship over the Oregon Ducks. This season revolved around the number 22. In Jordan's last game against Washington State, he carried the ball 22 times, and he was also named Pac-12 Freshman of the Year on December 22, 2020. Utah's game against USC in 2021 was head coach Kyle Whittingham's 222nd career win, and quarterback Cam Rising completed 22 passes in that same game. Utah officially retired the number 22 during their game against UCLA, the first jersey number to ever be retired by the football program. The Utes made their first Rose Bowl appearance on the same day of the year 2022, which also marked the start of the 100-year-long celebration of the iconic stadium that was built in 1922. Utah also went on to win the Pac-12 again in 2022. This was all the culmination of a tribute to both Ty Jordan and Aaron Lowe. Johnny Bright. Johnny Bright was a fullback and linebacker who played for Drake from 1949 through 1951. Though these were his most prominent positions, he also played running back and quarterback. Bright's participation in Drake against Oklahoma A&M on October 20th, 1951 was controversial, as it was the first time a prominent African-American athlete went against Oklahoma A&M in their home stadium. Jim Crow laws were still very prominent in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and this was shown, as Bright had been knocked unconscious 3 times by blows from Oklahoma A&M defensive tackle Will Banks Smith in only the first 7 minutes of the game. Despite his jaw being broken by Smith's elbow, Bright was able to complete a 61-yard touchdown to halfback Kim Pilkington before leaving the game. Despite Oklahoma A&M winning the game 27-14, this game caught national attention after photographs were captured by Des Moines Register cameramen Donald Tang and John Robinson. The photos showed the jaw-breaking blow Bright received, among others. Bright, despite his limited effectiveness for the remainder of the season, was named a first-team All-American and finished 5th in the balloting for the 1951 Heisman Trophy. Bright was also awarded with the Nils V. Swede Nelson Sportsmanship Award. This moment in history, also known as the Johnny Bright incident as it became widely known, eventually provoked changes in NCAA football rules regarding illegal blocking and mandated the use of more protective helmets with face guards. NCAA Football 15. As you all are probably aware, before the drop of EA College Football 25, EA Sports' last college football game was NCAA Football 14. But as it turns out, NCAA Football 15 was actually in development. They were believed to be building a game with the power to be played on a newer generation console, that being the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. However, once the lawsuits for name, image, and likeness came in, they were unable to finish this project. This evidence is backed up from blueprints that were shown of another EA Sports game in development titled EA NASCAR 10. If EA Sports College Football 15 was released, would you have bought it? Theft of Smokey. Starting in 1953, Tennessee's blue tick hound, Smokey, officially served as the mascot for the University of Tennessee. On the day of the matchup against the Florida Gators in Gainesville, Rev Bill Brooks, the owner of Smokey, was called by a, quote, University of Tennessee student saying that he had permission to take Smokey for a photo shoot. Expecting nothing nefarious, Brooks gave up the dog, not realizing that the person he gave the dog to just so happened to be a Kentucky student. Kentucky students were angry after Tennessee fans stole the rivalry's trophy, quote, the barrel. And with the rivalry between the two teams coming up, now was a perfect time to get revenge. The scheme by Beauchamp Brogan started a week of insanity. Tennessee students drove to Lexington and vandalized Memorial Coliseum. Another group tried to bombard a fraternity house where they believed Smokey was being kept. They were met with the sound of barking dogs and howls that were made by the fraternity brothers. After reports of Kentucky fans reportedly planning a Knoxville raid came in, roadblocks were set up by students and a carload was taken hostage in exchange for Smokey, a request which fell on deaf ears. As the response to the stolen mascot, Tennessee students took Kentucky's live mascot, Colonel the Wildcat. Once the two teams met on Stoll Field, the two mascots were exchanged, with Smokey wearing a Kentucky-themed jacket. The Wildcats won this game, 23-0. The night the barn burned. On September 21st, 1996, the Auburn Tigers hosted the LSU Tigers in Jordan-Hare. Both of these teams were ranked, so the expectation was that this game was going to be a significant one in the conference and across the country. This turned out to be true, but not in the expected format. Early in the first quarter, smoke appeared in one of the corners of the stadium, which grew rapidly larger as time went on. As it turns out, the old Auburn Sports Arena was up in flames. The building, nicknamed The Barn, was the former home of Auburn basketball from 1956 until 1969, when the program eventually moved away. By this point, the arena was scheduled for demolition, but they never got to it. Instead, nature did. The 85,214 people in attendance were left in awe at the fire. While public address announcements assuring fans the fire was outside played over the stadium speakers, Auburn and LSU continued the game without stoppage. Commentators and those who were not aware of the announcements were left in shock and concern as the fire went on, thinking that it could possibly be in the stadium. Fortunately, nobody was hurt by the fire, but maybe Auburn fans' hearts were hurt as Auburn lost to LSU 19-15. Gamblers poisoned Oklahoma's football team. 1959 had one of the biggest opening weekend games up to that date. Number 2 Oklahoma was a massive college football force, having only lost 2 games over the previous 5 seasons. The Sooners were heading to Evanston for a match against number 10 Northwestern. Oklahoma arrived in Illinois earlier than usual, flying on Wednesday night instead of Thursday. The team stayed in the Orrington Hotel and held a secret workout session Thursday afternoon. After practice, they headed to the Ches Paris in downtown Chicago. While most of the coaching staff did not attend, all of the players except starters Preston Gatt and Edward Woohoo McDaniel made the trek to the nightclub. The players who attended were served fruit salad among many other items. But after 15 to 20 minutes, the players started to feel violently ill. Oklahoma players were suffering from vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea. 8 players, along with assistant coach Jimmy Harris, spent time at the hospital. Though many of the players returned in time for the game, the atmosphere in the locker room was completely different, and it showed on the field on Saturday. Northwestern walloped Oklahoma 45-13 in a monsoon. Investigating the cause of the mass poisoning, they immediately pointed to the chest Pruitt as the main cause. Oklahoma's team physician wanted to do more tests on evidence secured at the hospital, but the hospital said that they lost the files. Even without the files, Oklahoma officials reached the conclusion that the players received food poisoning from the apomorphine in the fruit salad, and the team also came to the conclusion that gamblers and/or the mob poisoned them, which would account for the point spread dropping the day of the poisoning. The game seemed to have an everlasting impact on the college football world, ending Oklahoma's dynasty and putting Northwestern on the map. NIL ended the dynasty. It has been an interesting discussion between fans regarding the effects on NIL in college football. Since its inception, it can be argued that it has done more for certain teams than others. More money equals more payment to players, equals better players, equals more wins. In the case of Nick Saban and Alabama, who are known to have a massive dynasty before the inclusion of NIL, fans believe that NIL is the direct force behind the end of the dynasty and the retirement of Nick Saban. This discussion spiked because of the recent seeming decline of Alabama, as they have not won a national championship since 2020, while also taking losses to eventual national champions Georgia and Michigan. Despite this, the question cannot be answered yet. Alabama is still a very formidable force in college football, even making the playoffs last season. Though they did lose Nick Saban, their new coach, Kalen DeBoer, carried his former team, the Washington Huskies, all the way to the national championship despite having less resources. What can be certainly argued is that Alabama's 2024 season will play a massive part in this claim. Jason Carter. Ending off this part on a wholesome note, Jason Carter is the name of the shortest college football player in history. Carter comes in at 4 feet 9 inches. He got his collegiate debut versus Utah, gaining 1 yard on his first career carry. The video of his carry garnered over 500,000 views, and he was awarded a helmet sticker by ESPN's College Football Final. He also appeared on SportsCenter and the Jim Rome radio show. What a win by Rice here. And there you have it. That's part 6 wrapped up and over with. The next part will be the final part of the college football iceberg. So I wanted to thank all of you for supporting me with this series, as it's been a long ride. And I think by this point I've typed almost 50,000 words total on this script. To say my fingers are tired is quite the understatement. Nonetheless, it's all worth it to bring you guys the greatest content. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all again in the final part.